In this video, we're going to take care of a few miscellaneous sheet metal items on the interior of this 1971 Camaro. Stay tuned. What's up guys, my name is Dan and you're watching Resto Car, your source for DIY content to help you finish that build. Alright, so we got a number of just random things planned for today, all related to metalworking of some sort. So let me go ahead and show you what the plan is and then we'll get started. So we're going to be focused on metalworking the interior today. The goal is to get this thing in epoxy primer over the next couple of videos. So basically today we are going to be focused on plug welding this passenger floor pan to the rocker. It's one part I haven't finished with this yet. And then we're going to clean up these welds. That's another thing that I haven't finished. I put this passenger floor pan in before I had my YouTube channel and I just didn't get to finish everything. So we got to clean those welds up and we have to also smooth out these plug welds a little better. Again, just going for that good original look. You know, we don't want, even though these will be covered up, we want to make sure we make everything look good on the inside and out. So once we get that finished, we'll likely move on to cleaning up the welds around the subframe connectors. They're not bad and we're not going to take too much off of those because they, you know, are providing stability to the car. So we're just going to smooth them out a little bit, and being that I never put any primer or anything on it, there's a good bit of like surface rust there that needs cleaned up as well. So we're going to do that on both of them. Clean up the welds and clean up surface rust. And then after that we have 2 holes to fill, one there and one there, and these are just holes that were left from some exhaust hardware that was on the car when I got it. So once we get that all done, we're going to go ahead and mix up some fiberglass filler and put a thin coat over every weld that I made in this car, just to make sure that we get all the pinholes filled. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started on that passenger floor pan, and then once we get that finished, we'll just continue on knocking out these little tasks that I showed you, and all of this to get closer to getting this thing cleaned up and epoxy primed. Alright guys, so we are under the car looking up at the rocker panel and the passenger floor pan. So this is the floor pan right here. This is the inner rocker panel right here. When I put this panel in a while ago, I put weld through primer on the inner rocker and also on the other side of the flange for the floor pan. Also punched holes about every 2 or 3 inches. And this is where we're going to plug weld. Now with plug welding, you want to make sure that you don't have a gap and you want to make it nice and tight. So whenever you get vice grips on this thing, you want to make sure that these holes are flat to the metal. And sometimes you have to take a body hammer and tap them down. And you'll probably see some of that as I'm going through this. I'm going to go ahead and start over here, which this is towards the rear of the car. And I'm going to start plug welding this way. And then once we get here, we'll check how all this is, and then we'll get this piece in. Basically, I'm going to put vice grips in a couple areas to hold this tight. And I have these, they're almost like plug welding vice grips, if you will. So I'll show you what those look like. And basically, they go around the area you're going to plug weld and clamp it tight. And that's what I like to use. So I'll go ahead and set up and show you guys that. Alright, here's these vice grips I was talking about. They're like spot weld or plug weld vice grips. And basically they clamp down pretty nice. And they make this stuff easy because you clamp down around everything and it holds it down for the weld. And then if you need to tap them down, you just take the back of a body hammer. And that's it. Fire on the welder, go to town. All right, quick look here. This doesn't line up well, so what I'm gonna do is just work that with the body hammer and the dolly until I get it lined up with the floor, with the original floor. Over here, where the floors overlap, you can see that gap there. That's gonna be hard to get in place and keep it there because you can't get vice grips like, you know, on both sides of this. So what I did on the driver's side is I just ran a sheet metal screw down, or I guess up through here, and then welded this in place, then took that out and then welded that. So that's essentially what we're gonna do here. All right, so we got the bottom side plug welded up, nice and tight now. And now we're just gonna go ahead and focus on this little piece here, just basically continuing this weld across. I worked this out from underneath. It was down in there before and it wasn't tight up against the rocker. So at this point, I'm just gonna weld this shut and then we'll clean it up and then we'll move on to something else. All right, so while I have the welder hooked up, I'm going to go ahead and take care of these two holes. These were holes from bolts that were holding the exhaust hardware onto the car. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of those. I don't have a magnetic plate that's, well, in fact, I don't have one at all. So basically, I'm just going to go around with the welder and fill this in. It'll take a little longer than it would if I had a copper plate on the back, but that's all right. And first things first, you gotta use the body hammer to kind of knock those down. Alright, so we got the holes welded up where the old exhaust bolts came through. And now we're going to go ahead to the passenger floor and clean up these welds up along here and around. I just kind of did a rough job on it whenever I put this in a while ago. So we'll go ahead and clean those up the best we can. And we're also going to go ahead and smooth out these plug welds. Alright, so that's about as good as this is going to get. I'm just worried about some of this not looking like it lined up too well whenever I welded it the first time, and I don't want to get it too thin, so that's pretty good. And all this stuff will hit with fiberglass filler. but it's definitely a lot better than it was. So that's good enough. And now we will move on to something else. So we're done up here with this floor pan. We're done with that floor pan over there. I was thinking more about these subframe connectors in the welds, and I'm just going to leave them alone. I don't want to mess with them, so I don't want to grind them any thinner than they are. I mean, it should be pretty good. So we'll just clean those out whenever we get to cleaning the interior out for epoxy primer. We'll get rid of all that rust and deal with it then, but we're going to leave the welds alone. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and prep all of the welds on the floor pans and around the subframe connectors for fiberglass filler. We're going to hit them with a conditioning disc first, then a wire wheel, and then we're going to go ahead and wipe everything down with wax and grease remover. Alright, so we got the fiberglass filler on the welds on the floor pans and also the subframe connectors. So now we're going to go ahead and grind most of this stuff off. It was easier to apply most of this with my finger than it was to use the spreader, just because of all the contours and the speed at which I needed to go. So when I started off over here using the spreader, the filler kicked before I could use it all, so that's when I switched over and started applying it the other way. And it was definitely a lot easier around the subframe connectors. So a little messy, don't judge me too bad, it worked. So we're gonna go ahead and grind this off now. And make sure you wear a good dust mask when you're doing this stuff. You don't want this stuff in your lungs. Alright, so we got all of the fiberglass filler sanded down. I definitely had way too much on there, but again, it was a lot of contours and stuff like that. It made a mess, but we got the job done. So a little bit of touch-up work to do as far as a few spots here and there that are still too high with the filler, but we'll get those whenever we prepare the entire floor for some type of primer. So that's where it is. Alright, that is it for this one. We're that much closer to getting the interior of this thing in epoxy primer. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, hit that notification bell so you get alerts whenever we post new videos. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put them down below and we'll get back to you. If you got links to your builds, go ahead and put those down below as well. We'll see you in the next one.